One of the key things in a city today is, yes, the city is there, the buildings are there, the streets are there, but the transport in the city is absolutely an integral part of it. You have to move people. And there's some interesting statistics around transport. Today in the world there are about 800 million cars. And by 2030 that's expected to double. And about 120 years ago there wasn't a single car. So some of those things are quite scary. In America, if you put 100 average Americans together in a room, and you can count the cars outside, there's 1,000 Americans, 1,000 cars. If you put 1,000 Western Europeans in a room and you count the cars outside, it's between 450 and 600, depending on where in Europe you look. In South Africa, if there were 1,000 of us here, on average, there would only be about 130 cars outside. And in China, for 1,000 people, and this is interesting because this is a statistic of about 5 years ago when we started this project. At that stage, the number was the same for China and for India. If you had 1,000 Chinese people and 1,000 Indian people outside in the parking lot, there would be 8 cars for each of those 1,000 people. In India, that number of 8 has in the last 5 years gone to about 15. And in China, that number has gone to nearly 80. But in China, there's nearly, what, a quarter of the world's population, 1.3 billion people. In India, there's 1.1 billion people. So there you're sitting with a third of the world's population, where the average car ownership is, say, 20, 30 for every 1,000 people. And in America, you're sitting with 1,000 cars for 1,000 people. So that's an interesting statistic. Another interesting statistic is that about 2-3 years ago, urbanization surpassed the halfway mark. So more than 50% of the world live in cities now. And that is about 2-3 years ago. And it's not stopping and it's not slowing down, it's probably speeding up. But interestingly, if you look at oil, in 1964, the biggest amount of oil ever was discovered. And since then, it's only been dropping down. And even if you count tar sands and sludge and all of those amazing, horrible things that people are using today in fracking in the Karoo, today we're using, on an annual basis, 5 times more oil than is being discovered. So whether you believe we're going to run out of oil or not is sort of irrelevant, because the point is, in terms of discovering of oil, we passed the peak of that in 1964. And if you pass the peak of discovering at some point, you're going to run out of this stuff at some point. When is the debate? And the debate about when is getting quite scary, because a lot of the experts on this thing are saying that we're not running out of oil, because the economy will make that you never run out of anything. The price will just go up and up and up. But we've probably passed the peak production of oil round about now. And at some point, we're going to pass a point where the demand of oil outstrips the supply of oil. And then nobody knows where the price is going to go. Anyway, all of that is background to say to us, the car's here to stay, oil is not here to stay. Global warming is a real issue. Pollution in cities is a big, big, big issue. And what can we do about that? And we were a bunch of engineers came together, looked at those things. We looked at where were battery technologies going at the time. And we said, well, the obvious answer is electric vehicle transport. Except for the fact there's no pollution, it doesn't use any oil or whatever. It also gives you a completely quiet solution, which I think for us living in cities and coffee shops springing out all over the place, and offices are down in Woodstock, where 3-4 years ago in Solari Road, there wasn't a single place you could go for lunch or for coffee on the street. It just wasn't done. You would get mugged if you sat down there for more than a minute. Now it's all over the place, but it's noisy. And imagine if you could be sitting in those places and the transport would be quiet. It would be so fantastic. Anyway, it was clear electric vehicles are going to be the answer of the future, because from the total, if you look at the total analysis of source to wheel, whatever form the energy is, whether that energy is coal, oil, solar, whatever, the total efficiency from when you dig up that energy to where you use it on the road, electric cars are by far the most efficient. And secondly, what electric cars offer you is a complete flexibility of energy supply. It can be fossil fuel that generates electricity, it can be a solid fuel, a fluid, it can be water, it can be solar, it can be wind, it can be anything. So that, the efficiency combined with the flexibility makes it clear that this is where the world is going. And the world has realized this. In America, President Obama said that by 2015, he wants 1 million electric cars on the road. Spain announced they want 1 million electric cars on the road by 2014. China has upped all of that and said 2013. In Denmark, if you buy a normal car, there's 180% tax on it. They've reduced that tax to 0% for electric cars. In Israel, there's 70% tax on normal cars. They've reduced that to 10% for electric cars. So whereas 3-4 years ago, if you went to ask McKinsey or Deutsche Bank or Frost & Sullivan, where is the world going, how many electric cars are going to be a few years from now, they all said no, they don't think there's any market for that at all. That was 4 years ago. If you now go and ask those same people, they will tell you that they reckon by 2020, somewhere between 10% and 25% of world production is going to be electric. And that means that 9 years from now, somewhere between 10 and 20 million electric cars are going to be made. And nobody's really ready to make those sort of cars today. So it's a massive opportunity. It's the first time, I think, in the history of the automobile, in 120 years, that there's an opportunity for new players to come aboard, for the Teslas, the Fiskars, the Kodas, ourselves, to come aboard. And the way we read the market, for at least this decade, probably 2 decades, demand is going to outstrip supply. And it's going to be a market where if you can go in competitively, there's a space for you. Now, as engineers, we looked at this and we said, if this thing is efficient, if it drives well, if it sits on the road nicely, if it fits into the city nicely, all of that stuff's going to work. And we got to a point where we realized this good engineering talk is not going to work. We need a designer. We were fortunate to find Keith Halford at the time. And you talk about the history of design in Cape Town. Keith Halford made a car out of plaster of Paris in his father's garage in Pinelands in 1970, while he was a student at UCT. So that was the first car design in Cape Town that I know of. Keith went on to work for Jaguar. He did the XJ220, he did the F180. He did some really iconic designs for Jaguar. When Ford came along and took over Jaguar, a lot of the old Jaguar guys lost interest in working for Jaguar, and we were fortunate to grab Keith at that point. And Keith really was successful, I think, in explaining to us how important design is. And also in telling us that making a beautiful car and making an ugly car costs the same, it's equally hard, equally difficult. So you can just as well make a beautiful thing. And if you look at the examples out there, if you take the Fiat 500, the new Fiat 500, it's exactly the same car mechanically as the Panda. It's selling for probably 50% more, and they're selling many, many more of that. And the only reason for that is design. There's no other reason for that. And you can go through the history of the car and see how many examples of that is where design made the difference. Only design, not the clever engineering behind it, but design made the difference between a successful product and a failure commercially. And I really see an opportunity here for Cape Town, and I really think we stand a good chance to win this thing by 2014. And I think Cape Town has to, in all industries, in the textile industry, in all of those industries, carve a niche for ourselves, which is based on design. Because there's no way we can compete, I think, with the Chinese, with that part of the world based on cheap labor, on whatever it is, whether we're talking textile, whether we're talking this or that, whatever. The thing that we can really use to distinguish us in this country and in Cape Town is design. And we mustn't underestimate it, and we must put real focus and effort into that. And I think if we can win this Design 2014 thing, it can have for design the same sort of effect that the World Cup had for us last year. But it really needs to spill over into the commerce, into economy, into the daily lives of people, not just to us who like to do design, like beautiful things. It really has to have an effect on real life.